encouragement to you. Because even in the midst of the hardest and darkest times of your life, you can be confident, I can be confident and know that God is still good, God still works, God is still on his throne, and God is still in control. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, our circumstances in life do not change God's character. So whatever it is you're currently going through, dealing with, whatever's happening to you, you can know and you can rest in the fact that God has got you. Nothing ever falls out of the scope of his care and his sovereignty. Therefore, we can trust him. We should trust him every day. Right? If you want to find rest in the midst of this restless world in which we live, we have got to trust God. And I confess to you that, man, that is a struggle for me continuously. And I've learned and I am training myself to trust God's sovereignty with today. Not to live in yesterday, not to worry about tomorrow, but to trust God's sovereignty for today. And I'm confident that Moses' mother, as she took her son and handed him back to Pharaoh's daughter to raise, I'm confident that she had to trust her son to God. This is where we left off last week. Exodus chapter 2, look at verse 10. Let me just read this again. It says, when the child Moses grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter. Remember the context. This was a time when the Pharaoh said, hey, every Hebrew boy is to be tossed into the Nile River. Moses is born. His mother hides him for a few months. But when she realizes she can't hide him anymore, she makes a basket. She places Moses in the basket in the reeds of the river. Pharaoh's daughter finds him, but in God's sovereignty, she allows Moses' mother to take him and to raise him till it says he grew older. Most believe it's probably like preschool years. And so here it says when the child grew older, she, Moses' mother, brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, I drew him up out of the water. Now, here's what's really interesting about this. This is all Exodus says of Moses in his life from the time of his preschool days till adulthood. And so we don't know a ton of what happened to Moses during this, we're going to talk about this in a minute, this 40-year span, preschool to adulthood. But here's what we do know. From Acts chapter 7, which we'll look at, as well as verse 11, beginning in verse 11, what we do know is that God was using these years, these 40 years, to prepare Moses and to train him for how God was going to use him. And that should be an encouragement to us as well. Even though Moses may not have known it, he was in the midst of God's training program. And for all of us, like for him too, it's a lot easier to see the ways that God is growing us and training us when we kind of can look back. It's harder when you're in the midst of it. I think about my life, and I look back now that I'm 45 years old, and I look back to me growing up and seeing all the ways that God grew me and trained me and all the things I went through to get me where I am today. I don't think it was a coincidence that I had, as my middle school basketball coach, the first time I started playing basketball, middle school basketball coach was a pastor who discipled me and mentored me. He shaped me to be the pastor I am today. I think being the president of Fellowship of Christian Athletes, FCA, in my middle school, my high school, it prepared me to lead the way I lead today. Being the captain of my basketball team in high school and learning how to function as a team and work together as a team for a common goal, that's helped me in what I do today in leading our staff, our church, our team. When I was in college, I was a speech communication major, and man, the chairman of the department took me under his wing. I didn't know why. And in every class, I thought I was better than the other students, but man, he would grill me every time I spoke. But little did I know that God was using him to hone the gift that God had given me. When I was later years in college, and I worked for a small church in Arkansas, and the pastor was just an angry man, and he often took that anger out on me. I now see how God used that experience to help me be the pastor that I am today. Hopefully not angry, but the pastor I am today. When I graduated seminary, I was ready to go and lead a church and preach God's word, but God said, no, first I want you to go to California and teach at a private Christian high school. Now I want you to teach Bible theology to a bunch of juniors and seniors in high school. Man, God used that as some great training for me to take all of this theology that I just learned and to put the cookies on the bottom shelf and to teach high school students. And that has really equipped me to be the kind of teacher that I am today. And I could keep going. You could keep going. Looking back, it's so much more clear how God has used all things to get me where I am today. And the same is true in your life. But nothing, if we affirm and believe in God's sovereignty, nothing happens by accident. But instead, God can and God does use all things for his purpose. He's always working. We learn over in Acts chapter 7, Stephen, who is about to be martyred, he's proclaiming, he's giving this speech, and he's talking about Israel's history and God's working through his people. He talks a little bit about Moses. And it's really interesting, in Acts 7, that's where we're told that Moses was 40 years old when the events of verse 11 take place. And so if you do the math, it's like 35, 36 years of Moses' early life. Moses spent in Egypt as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and no doubt he was equipped and trained in all things Egypt. In fact, I want you to hold your place here in Exodus. Don't lose your place because we're going to go back and forth. But turn to the New Testament book of Acts. Acts chapter 7. I want you to see what Stephen says here. It's really, really good, really powerful. Look at Acts 7, verse 20 to 22. Acts 7, 20 to 22. Here's what Stephen writes, or says. It says, at this time Moses was born. He was beautiful in God's sight, and he was brought up for 3 months in his father's house. And when he was exposed, Pharaoh's daughters adopted him and brought him up as her own son. Okay, so kind of a summary there. Verse 22. And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in word and deed. Pretty insightful, isn't it? What Stephen says is that Moses, for these 40 or 35, 36 years, the first 40 years of his life, if you will, in Egypt, Moses was trained, instructed, and educated in all things Egypt. Mathematics, science, philosophy, language, warfare. Verse 22, when it says that Moses was mighty in word and deed, I believe that probably means that he was a leader. He was eloquent. He was persuasive. A first century historian, a guy by the name of Josephus, actually tells us that this Pharaoh actually did not have a son or an heir. And so he was nurturing and training Moses for the throne. But little did Pharaoh know, and I think probably little did Moses know, that God was actually training Moses for a different leadership. And the reason I want us just to start there is please don't assume that your experiences, your education, your relationships, your leadership roles, whatever it may be, don't assume those things are wasted. Don't assume that they have no purpose and that God can't use them. He can use them. He does use them in all of our lives. But here's the hard part. Often before God wants to work fully through us, you know what he wants to do? He wants to first work in us. We don't like to admit that, do we? God often, and we see this throughout Scripture and all the people that God works in, God often chooses to first work in us before he works more fully through us. I mean, I would bet to say that if you're a Christ follower here today, maybe you want God to use you. You should. You likely want to do great things for God, be it with pure motives or wrong motives, but either way, you want to do great things for God. The challenge for us is many of us don't want to endure the training to be used. I have always wanted to be a Navy SEAL. And I know you look at me and go, dude, you look just like a Navy SEAL, don't you? Why does everybody laugh when I say that? Is it because the Go Girl Cup? Is that why?
Yes.
I've always wanted to be a Navy SEAL. And I used to think that I could cut it until I watched one of those programs on Discovery Channel where they talk about their training. You ever seen those? There's one that's called Hell Week. It is actually about the most intense week of training for the SEALs. And I've read many books on this too, but basically what happens during this week, the SEALs who are in training, they get very little sleep, they don't get much food, but yet even though their food intake and their sleep is less, their intensity in working out is even more intense. These guys are treading water, they're swimming, they're boating, they're carrying these huge boards and logs and different things to train. And what they're trying to do is test their mental toughness. One biography I read of a Navy SEAL, he said that during this Hell Week, that in the midst of this week, they're exhausted. And everybody's mind is like, I just want to give up and quit. He said the commanding officers come out with hot, just off the conveyor belt, Krispy Kreme donuts and coffee And they teased the guys, testing their toughness and going, hey, just quit. Come get a donut. Come get a cup of coffee. That's when I would be out. I mean, I'd be like, 2 chocolate-covered little sprinkles, cup of coffee, I'm going home. Because personally, I love the idea of the glory of being a Navy SEAL. I don't want to do the training. Here we admit a lot of times when it comes to being used of God, we want the, quote, glory of being used of God, but we don't want to endure the training. But God's M.O. is typically, let me work in you before I work more through you. Let me show you this with Moses. Go back to Exodus 2, hold your place, but go back to Exodus 2, hold your place in Acts 7. Look at verse 11 and 12. So it says, one day when Moses, now he's 40 years old, one day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and he looked on their burdens. And when he saw that an Egyptian was beating a Hebrew, one of his own people, it says he looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Look at how Acts 7 tells us. Okay, just look back there real quick. Acts 7, verse 23-24. When Moses was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel, and seeing one of them being wronged, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. Now, a couple of things we learned there. First of all, Moses knew his heritage. Even though he was raised in Egypt as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, he knew that he was a Jew. He knew that he belonged to the Hebrew people. Also, it's very likely that even at this point, he knew that God wanted him to lead his people out of Egypt to the promised land. But look at the next verse, Acts 7, verse 25. Okay, speaking of Moses, he supposed that his brothers, the fellow Jews, would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand, but they did not understand it. Apparently, even at this point, God had already begun to stir in Moses' heart to lead. By his very actions here, he demonstrated he wasn't ready yet to lead. Because here he is, he sees one of his own people, a Hebrew, a person, a Jew, being beaten by an Egyptian, but instead of using his influence in his authority as the king in training, what he does instead is he murders the guy and he buries his body in the sand. That is a prime example of doing God's will our way. Or trying to fulfill God's mission in our timing rather than his timing. Moses' outburst of anger here leading to murder, it indicated that there was a lot more going on in here than even Moses himself knew. Yes, he had all the tools to lead, but he didn't yet have the heart. So what God does is God's going to take him out of Egypt and send him away for a time to begin to work in him. But look at Exodus 2, verses 13 to 15. You can stay in Exodus 2. We're done with that. Exodus 2, verse 13. When he went out the next day, after killing the Egyptians, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? And he answered, he said, well, who made you prince and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? It says then that Moses was afraid and thought, surely this thing is known. What Moses had done in secret, he now realizes was actually seen. And so verse 15, it says, when the Pharaoh heard of it, that he sought to kill Moses. Moses tipped his hand. Moses demonstrated that he's for the Hebrew people, not the Egyptians, and the Pharaoh wasn't having any of it. And so the Pharaoh pursues him, trying to kill him, and Moses knew it, and so Moses ran. So verse 15 says, he fled, he ran from Pharaoh, and he stayed in the land of Midian. And verse 15 again, he sat down by